Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our March webinar for JSCM Group. This is Madison Slater. I'm the Executive VP of Security and Operations here at JSCM, and this month our topic is Best Practices for Authentication Policies. Valuable insights into authentication policies to help you better protect your organization's sensitive information. Got a good topic this month, so sit back, enjoy about 45 minutes of security talk, and as always at the end we will open it up for questions if you have any of those. So for any of you that have maybe not been joining us so far this year, we decided that we wanted 2023 to be a year where we're building on a bigger conversation. So what we're doing this year is a 12-part webinar series that talks about different policies and different aspects of security. In January, we discussed establishing third-party risk management standards. Last month, we talked about how to properly document user access. And this month, again, we're going to be talking about best practices for authentication policies. Now, like I said, I'm the EVP here at JSCM Group, and where a lot of this is coming from is us going through an internal process last year. We did a SOC 2 audit, and internally we had to build out a lot of these security policies that we didn't necessarily have as fully fleshed out before. We focus on security here at JSCM, but we also know that not every organization, it's impossible to be perfect, right? Like we're constantly working on things, so we include ourselves in that. So what we're doing is trying to take what we learned last year, both through going through our audit and also just with some of the things that we see our clients facing, and try to share that information with you. Now, if you are attending this as an IT person, welcome. And if you're not an IT person, also welcome. We were really trying to make this webinar series this year for the masses. So if you are someone from your organization who is maybe more focused on IT, I urge you, get them involved in this conversation. We will have this webinar available recorded on our website that you'll be able to send to them. We really want this to be a bigger discussion because, as we all know, security doesn't stop at IT. It's a company-wide, organization-wide focus that we all need to have. So what I've liked to do with these webinars is to start with a question. I think that asking a question is one of the best ways to really start the conversation. So our question this month is, how do you know that each employee in your organization only has the access to the systems that they need to have access to? Now, this is a bigger conversation, and we started this a little bit last month with our user access discussion. But one of the things that we see in organizations across the board is that we have employees who have access to things that they don't necessarily need access to. Why is this bad? Well, it can lead to obviously bigger security issues. Now, this phenomenon, I guess is what we could call it, is what we refer to as privilege creep. And really what this means is that we have users who are granted access to more things than they really need. And we talked a lot about privilege creep in our February webinar, so if you didn't get a chance to join us for that, or if you haven't taken a look at it yet, I strongly urge you to go back and watch that one. But privilege creep is one of the biggest things that we see continue to wreak havoc on an organization. And usually what this comes from is we've got someone who is just given more and more permission, more and more access. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of times that's us in IT. That's us as administrators. But this also can happen with executive level people. It can happen with different users in the organization. When we have privilege creep, it means that we have people who have more access than they need, which means that they are easier targets or higher targets when it comes to an attacker. Attackers are going after people in our organization that have that access that could grant them further access into our sensitive data, into our financial information, and all of the things that we really want to protect. So any of you that have talked to me or maybe even just attending previous webinars of ours, you will know that I operate a lot from the perspective of telling stories. I think that telling stories is a good way to sort of tie a concept or an idea into the real world. So I want to tell a story about something that happened. It's been a couple of years at this point, this particular scenario, but I will say this has not been a unique situation. This is something that we've had happen, at least in some capacity, to many of our clients, and something that we just anticipate is going to be something that we get calls about. So here at JSCM, one of the services that we offer is incident response. So we do a lot when it comes to helping our organizations maybe battle or clean up after the fact if there is a security incident. And this particular security incident that happened a couple of years ago, again, this is one that's happened with a couple of our clients, and one that I think really helps us start to dive into the bigger discussion here, which is our authentication. So several years ago, we received an incident response call from one of our clients, and their Microsoft 365 email environment had been breached. Now, the way that this came about, the way that they figured it out, is they had received a phone call from a client of theirs saying, hey, we received an email from a person in your organization. Let's just say her name was Sarah. And we got this email from Sarah. It's asking us for information that we just don't feel is something we should be sending over email. Also just seems a little suspicious. So IT department starts to look into it, and they start to get very, very suspicious that Sarah's email account has been compromised. So they call us. Myself and another member of our team, we start looking into the issue to try and figure out what's going on. So anytime we're dealing with a 365 issue, one of the best things for us to do is to gain access administratively into the 365 tenant. So we were granted access. We started looking around. We started with user Sarah's account, and there's auditing available in 365. So through that, we found that we were able to determine that there were suspicious logins to Sarah's account. So, we could directly say, okay, yes, it does look like this user account has been compromised in some way. But we always try to take it a step further, because oftentimes that final piece that you see was not the first breadcrumb. There's something else that started that before the final thing that actually makes us perk up. So we continue to dig through the logs, continue to look at their environment, and what we eventually found was, yes, this person, Sarah's account, had been compromised. That was not the initial entry point, though. What had happened was that the IT person, actually the person who had contacted us, it was their account that had been compromised initially. Now, there's this thing in 365 with an admin account where you can set it up with your just regular email address, and that's what this person had done. This is something that we strongly urge you not to do. You should have a separate login, but they had set up their email account in 365 to also be a global administrator, which means you can do absolutely anything you want. Now, they did this with the best of intentions. They were, of course, the IT person. They were doing this to be able to manage the system. However, their account had gotten compromised because they had a fairly weak password. And that was, if we found out, a password that they had used on other accounts. As we all have done at least some point in the past, that habit of reusing a password. So the actual thing that happened was the global administrator account for this IT person had been compromised due to a weak password, lack of MFA, no real auditing in place, same email address as their regular account. They compromised the global admin account, logged in as administrator, granted as the attacker and the account that they had breached, granted themselves access into other email accounts so that they could have send as permissions, identified the person in the accounting department, Sarah, and compromised her account. Her account was not actually compromised directly. It was because they had compromised an administrator account and then granted themselves access. What we were able to recommend to them was a couple of things, but a lot of it tied back to authentication. They had weak authentication practices in place. What we often see, and it was the unfortunate circumstance in this situation as well is that it started with IT. The person who was responsible for managing the security of the system was also susceptible to a weak password. Passwords, I will go ahead and tell you, that's not the end all be all when it comes to authentication, just to give you a little bit of a spoiler, but we have to understand that it is a first level, right? And this IT person was not operating with good authentication practices in place. Authentication is the start to granting access. It's the first piece. At some point in the future, hopefully, we will all be able to use passwordless systems, meaning we don't have passwords, we have other ways to verify our access, but authentication is how we get in. Whether it's a password, whether it's MFA, that's how we get into systems. So we have to make sure that we are doing things when it comes to authentication, starting with passwords, but moving down into the deeper areas of authentication to protect ourselves, to make sure that we are not susceptible to these kinds of things in our own organizations. Now, again, this story, this is one of dozens that we've had even just over the last couple of years. Most breaches, I think the current statistic is over 80% of all breaches start with compromised credentials. How do credentials get compromised? Poor practice. Now, our focus this year in these webinars is we're talking about policies. Policies are obviously just the starting point. People don't have to follow them, but we at least need to have some sort of practice in place to set our baseline. And what we see a lot of times when we're dealing with our incident response issues is that it's not necessarily the people that we often think, yeah, they're going to have a weak password. It's the people, unfortunately, us in IT or us with those privilege creep issues that have more permissions than we probably should. We're the ones that are following bad practices. So we have to make sure that we are doing this in a way that we're getting everyone on board, in a way that we're making sure that everyone is paying attention. Now, when it comes to authentication, we're going to dive into this in just a second about what we need to be focused on when it comes to authentication. The big thing that we need, again, to focus on is that this is an everyone problem. This is not an IT problem. This needs to apply everywhere. A lot of the things that we talk about when it comes to protecting access, what we often find when we're presenting these ideas to clients, or we're having remediation discussions after we've done a security assessment, is, well, I want to do that, but I don't think that my boss is going to go for it. Or honestly, the more common one, I want to do that, but my users are going to complain. You're right, they probably will. When we start implementing stronger forms of authentication, when we start doing things to make ourselves harder to hit, people are going to complain. You know what they're going to complain about more is when we can't operate, when we can't provide our services, when we can't have a running business because we were compromised in some way. That example, the 365 compromise, they had several days where they were cleaning up, and that was just email. They were luckily an organization that actually didn't rely too much on email. They still did a lot of their business over phone and other forms of communication. But think about that in your organization. I know here we do rely a lot on email. Yes, we can pick up the phone and we try to do that as much as possible. But if our email system were down for even a day, if we were worried about accessing it because we didn't know who was in it, that can be really detrimental. So we have to make sure that this is an organizational wide focus, otherwise we won't be successful. So it's why, again, if you're someone that's on this webinar and you are an IT focused person, it is on you to try and get that conversation going. The fear of implementation, the fear of my users are going to complain, someone's not going to like it, we're past that. We have to be, because the reality is that we are all targets. All of our organizations can be hit. We are far past the days where they're going after the higher end organizations only. They're going after all of us. Why? Because they know that they can, because we still have that mindset. We still have the mindset of, well, I don't want to implement MFA because my users are going to complain. I would rather my users complain initially, trust me, they'll get used to it, than me have to deal with a bigger issue and have to clean up a massive outbreak. So again, we're talking about this from the policy perspective, and we're going to go through here in just a second. We'll go through some of the things that I feel like a good authentication policy should include, but the mindset really needs to be, before we even try to implement this policy, we've got to have everyone on board. We've got to have our key decision makers, our stakeholders on board. Otherwise, we've just got a Word document that's got a bunch of letters on it that no one's going to pay attention to. Now, we here at JSCM, we've always put a big focus on authentication. We do not rely simply on passwords, even though there is a section of our authentication policy that does talk about passwords. And a lot of this stuff we have revamped over the years. And so if you do currently have an authentication policy, this is a good opportunity for you to review it. Where does this authentication policy live, or where should it live? It's up to you. Ours lives in our information security policy book. Some people, it lives in their employee handbook. It needs to be somewhere where people understand what the expectations are, but more specifically, it needs to be enforced. Again, having it on paper is one thing. Enforcing it is where we really get the benefit of this work that we're trying to put into it. So building a policy, let's talk about this not just from what components you need to have in your policy, but let's talk about what it means to have good protection when it comes to authentication. So the first layer, again, passwords. Now, I want to spend a very small amount of time talking about this because I do not believe that passwords are the future. I don't feel like they've really been beneficial for many years at this point, but unfortunately we are still dealing with systems that we have to have them. That being said, even though it is not the end-all be-all system, there is still a need to make sure that you are enforcing good password hygiene. The days of 8-character passwords are long gone, and I will go ahead and tell you, if you are sitting there right now and you're saying, yep, we've got a password policy, but it says 8 characters, it's not good enough. Passwords are, as terrible as they are, we also have to make sure that we're not just falling victim to old habits. Yes, 8 characters were good 10 years ago. Not anymore. So when we talk about password hygiene, we first need to make sure that we're covering the basics. Minimum is usually ranging somewhere, depending on what you're reading, between 10 and 16. What I will tell you is the longer you go, the better it is. The longer the password, the harder it is to crack. The trade-off, don't make your users change their password so often. So our password policy here, 14-character minimum. I always urge people to go longer. We make them change it twice a year. That's it. It's a lot easier for someone to remember a long password and not have to change it so often. Now, another key part of password hygiene, outside of, complexity and stuff like that, yeah, you need to have that, is we need to be enforcing the mentality of don't reuse your passwords. That honestly is it doesn't actually matter how complex your password is. You can have a 30-character password, but if you use that on 3 different accounts, you might as well have a 4-character password. Why? Because the more we use a password, the more exposure that it has. So think about it this way. If you're, again, we'll say that you've got a really long password. You've got a 30-character password. You use that to log into your computer. That's your AD password. Cool. That's also attached to your email because of the way most organizations use it. That's fine. You can't control that. That's okay. But you think in your head, oh, that's a really good password. That's long. I'm going to use that on my Facebook account. Now you've just opened up that account, that password, to exposure. Where credentials get compromised isn't necessarily in how weak they are. Yes, passwords can be brute forced. It's more likely that someone reused that password on another system, and that system got compromised. So reusing passwords, we have to get that through people's heads. Don't do it. Regardless of if you think it's a good password or not, do not reuse passwords. I was talking to my parents several weeks ago, and they know enough to know that I work with computers, but they are admittedly not tech people. And I was talking to my dad, and my dad is a handyman. He can build anything, he can rewire a house. He's so talented. But it comes to technology, and his usage is very simple. And my mom works at a bank. And so we were having family dinner, and she was talking about how she was having to go through their annual security training, and I think the segment she had to do that day was password security. And I said, well, hopefully they summed it up simply and said, have a long password that is unique. And my dad just sort of looked at me quizzically, and he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, and I again tried to, in not so technical jargon, explain to him very simply, well, the more times you use the password, the easier it is to get. And he just sort of laughed and said, my password's the same on all of my accounts. But if they get it, they're not really getting access to anything. And I told him, I said, here's the thing. That's the problem with that mentality is we think, oh, well, if I use that password somewhere else, it's not going to be that big of a deal. It is. Trust me. If they're going after us, if they're going after our organization, guess what? They're going to look for our email addresses on the dark web, and they're going to find that email address in a known breach that has exposed credentials, and you better believe that they're going to try that password. That's what they do. How do I know they do that? We do it too. We're doing it ethically when we're doing our testing, but that is absolutely something that an attacker will do. We have to get people past the point where they think that reusing a password is okay. Doesn't matter how complex. At the end of the day, if you're reusing it, that's it. So when we talk about password hygiene, that's actually what I mean is outside of the specifics of what you're saying from a character perspective and all of that. Yeah, okay, cool. That's easy. Tell people, get them trained, don't reuse passwords. Get that understanding through their head. One of the best things you can do when it comes to our first layer. Now, on top of that, because again, passwords, they suck. The next thing, MFA. Absolutely, you have to enforce MFA. This should be a key portion of any authentication policy. It is 2023. We have to have MFA. We have to stop this conversation of, well, my employees, my coworkers, my boss, they're not going to like it. I don't care. It's at that point where if you're not doing MFA, you're not doing the bare minimum. The amount of conversations that we have with organizations that are trying to get cyber insurance or going through renewals, and these companies are enforcing MFA. That's just the reality. Any level of exposure that you have that is not protected by MFA, that's the way that they're going to get in. I don't care if your password's super secure. If there's not a second form of authentication, there's no way for you to verify that that password's going to be good enough to protect you. Think about the key areas that you could have exposure. I will tell you right now, if you have something like 365, has to have MFA. No beating around the bush. We have to make sure that we have it there. If you have VPNs, you have to make sure that you're enforcing MFA. Specifically, though, MFA has to be part of our authentication policy because, again, it's that mindset as a company. To work here at JSCM Group, you're going to have MFA. I jokingly tell any new employee, we have them set up their MFA app on the first day, and it can be a lot, especially if they're coming from an organization that didn't really enforce that. And I've had comments from employees over the years of, wow, you guys, you really take this seriously. Yep, we do. It is enforced. There are no exceptions. Your organization should not be any different. MFA is how you get better authentication. It's how you protect yourself. If we're not doing that, and if we're not making sure that we're being good stewards when it comes to our employees and telling them the dangers of things like having a weak password, then it doesn't matter. They're going to get in. The attackers are going to get in. So anytime we're looking at an authentication policy, I definitely want to make sure that we're seeing those. And inside of those, you can outline what are the things you expect. For example, in our authentication policy in the multi-factor authentication section, it specifically lists here are the tools or systems or environments that we use, that MFA is enforced, and it is every single one that I can do. It's our AD accounts, it's our email, it's our CRM, it's our VoIP phones. It let me do MFA, so I turned it on. The expectation is set with every single one of our employees, and no one goes around it. I feel better about our authentication because I've enforced that. Now, another layer, and where we can start to get a little bit deeper, and this is, again, if you've already got an authentication policy in place, this is where I would urge you to start pushing into zero trust. Now, this is a hot topic right now. Anything cybersecurity that you read is going to somehow say zero trust. Zero trust simply means that we don't trust you until you are verified. Zero trust relies a lot on authentication, but it also relies on vetting that user's access or need for access before granting it. Zero trust, the zero trust concept basically says inherently we don't trust you. You start with zero, and then we will add on to it as we figure out what is needed. Now, there's a lot of different ways that zero trust is being approached, but authentication is one of those things that we can tie into it. So an example of that would be your zero trust could say, in order to get access into our network, you have to be authenticated. And you're enforcing that through things like single sign-on, or you've got authentication mechanisms in place on your network access. Things like that are how you start to move towards zero trust. But when we're tying it to authentication, again, it really just means in order to get access to anything, you have to be verified. Zero trust is a big thing. Again, it's the hot topic right now. Why? Because this is the reality of where we need to be. We shouldn't inherently trust people. We can trust them as humans, but we shouldn't inherently trust that access. We could have a compromised account. We could have something that is trying to gain access that isn't what it says it is. So we have to make sure that we're implementing levels of that zero trust mentality, and we can start with authentication as that process goes. Now, one little thing to throw in here before I jump to the next slide, just as an added thought, one of the things that I find to be a lot that can be very beneficial when it comes to this deeper discussion of authentication. If your organization hasn't implemented a password manager, implement it. So there's a bunch of them out there. Obviously, you can go sign up for a lot of these on your own. I highly recommend, if you don't have one in your personal life, go get one. But password managers are a good way for you to start to enforce some of these principles. So I tell our employees here that I expect them to know 2 passwords: the password to log into their computer and the password to log into their password manager. That's it. We have a lot of systems that we're accessing. They can store those in the password manager. It makes creating those more complex passwords a lot easier, because then they can randomly generate them. They don't have them written down somewhere. So if that's not something that your organization has implemented, again, just a thought, I found when we started doing it here a few years ago, it drastically changed the way that people were approaching their credentials and approaching authentication. I don't know my passwords. Again, aside from logging into my computer and logging into my password manager, I don't really know anything else. And plenty of our stuff resets or makes us reset it every 30 days, 45 days, 90 days. That's a lot. And that's why people get into the habit of reusing passwords. So implement one. At least implement it with your key individuals in the organization, people that might have those really confidential access. Make sure that you're implementing at least for them, but it really is a good idea company-wide. It is an expense that I think is worth it, because it means that you can further enforce some of that good behavior, and you're not dealing with the complaints as much as making everyone remember a unique password for every system that they're logging into. So again, it's not on the screen, just something that I like to throw in. I do think that it helps when we're talking about authentication. Now, the other thing, and to tie back to what we talked about last month, is user access, basing it off of user roles. And again, this also is how we tie into zero trust. When we're talking about authentication, when we're talking about access, we need to make sure at the end of the day that if we're enforcing authentication, if we're utilizing that, we're doing it based off of what the user actually needs. We can do it by their role. We can do it by them as an individual, but that's how we get to the point that we don't have people with that privilege creep. If you, so here, we break people up into departments, and that's an easy way for me to manage access and for our internal security team to manage access. Breaking it down by the role instead of the person is a good way for you to make sure that you're not dealing with someone who has too many permissions. This can be something that takes a little while to unwind, and I'll be honest, we're going through that. So we're a small company, and um, there are many of us that have worn many hats around here. One of the things that we've done recently is we've added a new person to our team, Jay Patel, who is managing our red team and incident response team. Part of that is he's taking things off of my plate. We've grown enough that we have a whole separate department, and Jay is handling a lot of that stuff. What have we been doing? Unwinding some of my privileges and transferring them to him. Why? I don't run that team anymore. I don't need that access. Am I trustworthy here? I hope so. I hope that everyone feels that way. But I also know that I would be a big target. If someone were to try to compromise JSCM, my name's out there. I've got security in my title. They're going to figure out, I want to see what this person has access to. So we have to consider that here ourselves. But think about it from the perspective of what is the person's role, not just, well, no, yeah, I trust them. I think I'm a trustworthy person, but I also know I feel better not having all of that access. If you're in IT, we need to be under a microscope, honestly, more than anybody else. But if you've got executives in your organization that have just maintained a level of access over the years that they don't really need anymore, that's okay to wind that back. It's okay to pull that back, and we can enforce some of those things through good authentication practices, basing it things off of their role instead of just who they are. Now, to take a pause on our policy discussion for just a second. I will never be someone who sits on these webinars, who talks to you in person, on the phone, or anything like that. And I will never be anyone that says a policy is the end all be all to security. It's not. Again, you can have it written down and people don't have to pay attention to it. So when we're talking about authentication, again, over 80% of all compromises start, or breaches start with a compromised credential in some capacity. You need to be doing things inside of your organization to make sure that you've got a second set of eyes on it. One of the new things that is happening, or that's out there from a security perspective, is identity protection. And what these are tools or services that can help monitor your authentication, and they can help you look for that suspicious behavior. Again, even if you do have good, strong passwords, things can happen. So relying on a policy, relying on your MFA solely, nothing is 100%. So do yourself a favor and make sure that you're looking at it from the perspective of validation. I've got the policy in place. I've enforced certain settings in our systems, in our passwords, in our MFA, whatever it is, but I've got something that's keeping an eye on it. And identity protection, these services, these tools, that's where we're focused on that authentication piece. There's a slew of them out there. There's a wide variety of capabilities, but specifically what they're typically designed to do is look for that odd behavior that is the initial indicator of a compromise. An AD domain admin account logging in at 3 in the morning when it's typically used during business hours because that's when you are using it. Things like that. A user account logging into machines across the domain that no, that person's not even in that department. That's where our identity protection should be focused. Start with the policy, start with the mentality, but have something on the back end that can help you monitor that as well. That's where we really start to see that more comprehensive approach to security. All right, next steps. Again, we never want to do these webinars this year and just talk about this and not give you anything. We do have an authentication policy template. grab the QR. This is going to take you to a link on our website. If you already have an authentication policy, cool, take a look at it. We're starting these simply. We at least want to give you an initial piece of it, and you will see in any of the templates that we're creating, we're designing these. You can fill in your company information. You can fill in the list of systems that you're going to be enforcing MFA on. You can add to it, but we at least want to give you all a starting point. So make sure that you grab that if you're interested. Again, even if you've already got a policy in place, it can maybe give you some ideas. It's going to cover a bunch of the stuff that we just talked about. You'll see a password policy, like an actual password policy example in there. Recommendations on complexity and password length and all that stuff, but we're also trying to go into a little bit more of that MFA enforcement, the mentality of zero trust, and some of the additional things that you could do from an authentication perspective to further help maintain your organization security. The way that we're approaching this, again, we went through a SOC 2 audit last year, and we talk about it a lot, honestly, because it was such a good thing for us to go through. Not every organization needs to go through SOC 2. Not every organization needs to go through an official audit, but we also believe in making sure that what we're learning, we are conveying out to you all. We truly think about security every day. We think about it, how it impacts us, how it could impact you. So we're trying to use our experiences and the things that we're seeing with some of our other clients to help you make improvements as well in your own organization. As I said earlier, and if you've attended any of these so far this year, again, we're doing a 12-part webinar series. So coming up next month in April, somehow it's already almost here, we're going to be talking about device hardening. So we're trying to build on this throughout the year. You know, we've started out just talking about some of our third-party risks. Now we've talked a little bit about user access and how we sort of maintain that, and also enforcing things through the use of authentication. Next month, we're going to talk about how we harden our actual devices, our computers, our servers, our endpoints. How do we make sure that they are maintaining a level of security for us as well? So I hope you can join us next month as well. And again, we've got a whole 12-part series outlined through the end of the year, with the conclusion being talking about incident response, because that's honestly what we're building up to. The unfortunate reality is that we should all be prepared for an incident. Hopefully, though, by implementing some of these practices, by implementing some of these ideas and concepts, by the time we get to incident response at the end of the year, you're feeling a lot more confident in what your organization's approach would be. Thank you all very much for attending. I do want to open it up. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to send those over. There's a Q&A section in the webinar. Also, though, if at any point down the road you've got any questions, if someone else in your organization has questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address is here on the screen. If you have a person that you deal with here at JSCM outside of me, also feel free to reach out to them. We've got a great team of people here. Again, security is the name of the game around here. We all want to think about this and make sure that we're getting that information out to all of you. So this webinar will be recorded. It will be available on our website. If you do have other people in your organization that you think might need to hear a little bit more talk about authentication, please feel free to send them over to that. And also, our previous webinars for the year will be posted there in the event you didn't get to attend those. So just give it a second, see if we have any questions come in. All right, I'm not seeing anything initially, so we'll call it there for the month. Thank you all again for attending. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you in our April webinar. We talk about device hardening, and hopefully I can hear from a couple of you before then. Thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon and a wonderful rest of your week.